Hey guys, JB here to discuss Casey Hudson's return to BioWare. In case you missed it, Aaron Flynn resigned from his position as general manager at BioWare, which has a lot of people asking the question, will Casey Hudson save the Mass Effect franchise? Before we debate that, here's a little history on both Aaron Flynn and Casey Hudson at BioWare, and this is super relevant. I'm going to try to keep it brief but informative because it really points to a lot of the reactions that people are having from this news. Starting with Casey Hudson, he began at BioWare straight out of college as a technical artist. Some of the earliest games he's credited as working on at BioWare are MDK 2 and Baldur's Gate 2, both of which came out in the year 2000, that's 17 years ago. Casey quickly rose through the ranks to become project director on Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, which released in 2003, and as we know, that's one of the most beloved franchises of BioWare and pretty much of all time. He went on to be the project director on the original Mass Effect and eventually the Mass Effect trilogy, and he's largely known as the creative vision behind the entire concept for Mass Effect, so he holds a lot of weight and respect in the community. Casey remained project director through Mass Effect 3, so we're talking 2007 and before in development, through 2011, 2012 when Mass Effect 3 came out. But then he left BioWare in August of 2014 to pursue other creative endeavors. He ended up joining Microsoft Studios, which is Microsoft's video game development studio, as creative director in May of 2015. And that brings us to now. He has returned to BioWare as GM, general manager of the entire company, in July 2017. So it's safe to say that Casey Hudson played a major role in the original trilogy of the Mass Effect franchise. He brought the creative vision. He's the person who's largely credited for that. So he's very important to the community in Mass Effect. Now let's talk about Aaron Flynn's history. He also started right out of college at BioWare at the Edmonton studio as a programmer. He also worked on BioWare's early 2000 games like Baldur's Gate and Neverwinter Nights. Flynn also rose the ranks in his own way to director of programming right around the time of the original Mass Effect, so in 2007. Once BioWare was acquired by EA, that was in 2008, he was upgraded to CTO, Chief Technical Officer. Shortly after that, he became the COO of BioWare's Edmonton studio. Around the launch of Dragon Age Origins, Flynn became Edmonton's GM. That was back in 2009, and then shortly after, his GM role and position also expanded to the Montreal studio. And Aaron Flynn remained in that position at BioWare until 2015, so a fairly length of time being GM of those major studios at BioWare. At that point, BioWare consolidated the management team throughout its studios just to one, and that's when Aaron Flynn became the GM of BioWare. And then once again, that brings us to the present. He just resigned as GM here in July of 2017. So once again, it's safe to say that Aaron Flynn was heavily involved in everything that came out of BioWare, especially the Edmonton studio and Montreal. Later, it was all the studios, including BioWare Austin, but as you can tell, he was involved in almost everything. So we know the history of both of these guys, we know their roles and positions and what they worked on in the company. What does all of this mean? It means that in general, both Casey Hudson and Aaron Flynn were heavily involved in BioWare's games over the past 17 years. For Casey Hudson, we know he worked primarily on Mass Effect. I mean, he's considered the godfather of Mass Effect for a reason. He didn't work on the Dragon Age games. But when you look at Aaron Flynn, he's worked on the majority of all BioWare games. I mean, being GM since 2009 of the Edmonton and Montreal studios, it makes sense. So with that in mind, the reaction from some passionate and borderline angry Mass Effect and BioWare fans has been to pin the failures of the last few years of BioWare on Aaron Flynn while also celebrating Casey Hudson's return to the company. And I've just got to say, I don't understand that. They have both been there since 2000. They are both responsible for the successes of Mass Effect and Dragon Age. With regards to Aaron Flynn, along with Casey Hudson, the guy's been there for 17 years. That's a long time. I just do not understand how you could celebrate Flynn's departure from the company unless you're just super salty about Andromeda, which is something we're about to get into. Certainly, on the other hand, I can understand celebrating Hudson's return, and he was such an important part of the Mass Effect franchise, and if you are a big fan of that franchise and you are looking to the future, that has to give you some hope. Now let's talk about the most recent Mass Effect game. And regardless of how you feel personally about Mass Effect Andromeda, the game received mixed reviews and was heavily made fun of in the larger gaming community. Aaron Flynn was general manager of Edmonton and then upgraded to general manager of all of BioWare. And so if you're someone who looks at the top of the food chain to, direct the blame, then this happened under Aaron Flynn's watch. We also know that Montreal was the B team at BioWare, and while they had helped on previous things like DLC for Mass Effect 3, this was their first full release as a studio, so they were technically rookies on this kind of thing. Now, I can't seem to find a direct source on this, but I distinctly remember reading that Casey Hudson was involved in some of the early vision, early broad stroke ideas for Mass Effect Andromeda, but again, he left the company back in August 2014. So however much he ended up contributing to the final product, however much he was responsible, he wasn't officially credited. He wasn't with the company. I think the general understanding is that Mac Walters, one of the lead writers on the original trilogy, stepped in and tried to bring this project together, tried to get something that they could ship, and that's what we got out of Andromeda. So essentially, the story of Mass Effect with relation to Hudson is really self-contained within the original trilogy. It has nothing to do with Andromeda. It's not even included in the conversation. But the bottom line here is that people are acting like Casey Hudson's return is the second coming of Jesus Christ. It's actually insane. He is described as one of the best in the industry, and BioWare is certainly better off having him. But that doesn't necessarily mean that BioWare is better off without Aaron Flynn. They can't occupy the same position. I totally understand that. It may be that in the end that Casey Hudson is a better GM than Aaron Flynn, but they were both at the company while Aaron Flynn was GM from 2009 to 2014, and we know what happened during that time frame. That was Mass Effect 2 and Mass Effect 3, Dragon Age Origins, Dragon Age 2, Dragon Age Inquisition to a lesser degree, right? They were both there. So I think it's time people take a step back, realize what actually went down, because we can see how it went down, and stop acting like Aaron Flynn leaving is a good thing. Now, does Casey being the general manager of BioWare actually mean something for the future of the Mass Effect franchise? Was this decision made directly in response shortly after Andromeda came out, got mixed reception, the Kotaku reports came out about the franchise being on ice and people leaving the Montreal studio? The answer to that is maybe. Who knows? I mean, we really don't know. We're on the outside. I'm not an insider on BioWare, so I can't tell you the answer to that question. But people can certainly assume so. We can speculate all day long about what this means in relation to what happened in the past, but looking forward in the future, maybe this means that BioWare is starting to brainstorm on what they're doing with the Mass Effect franchise. Because if there's anyone to do that or help spur that for the company, it's going to be Casey Hudson. Some people are probably going to even more optimistic bounds by thinking that Casey Hudson returning means Andromeda DLC. Now, I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think this has anything to do with Andromeda. I think it more has to do with the future of the franchise. From what we can tell, publicly at least, BioWare is full steam ahead with Anthem. They showed it off at E3, and no matter how much you're looking forward to it, how much you might think it looks great, or how much you think it sucks, from a technical standpoint, it was really impressive. The size and scope and scale and detail was incredible. It's clear that BioWare has placed a lot of chips on Anthem, however long they've even been working on it, and some feel that was at the expense of Andromeda. Regardless, Casey Hudson agreed to come back as GM of a BioWare that is fully committed to Anthem. They've even said they believe that Anthem will be a 10-year-long franchise, whether it's several games or just one game they will constantly update, similar to Bungie's Destiny. We know the quality of work that Casey is responsible for, whether it's KOTOR, Jade Empire, the entire Mass Effect original trilogy. We know what Casey Hudson brings to the table in terms of quality. I'm just curious to find out what he brings to Anthem, how he will, increase the value of that game and make it even better. That's the one thing that gets me really excited. As someone who is generally optimistic about this sort of thing, I know there's a huge crowd out there who even still is like, I'm not excited about Anthem, it's not my kind of game. But again, as someone who is looking forward, Casey Hudson returning really does get me excited, even more so for Anthem. So to kind of wrap up my thoughts, no, I am not celebrating the departure of Aaron Flynn. I think that's a little disrespectful considering how much this guy is responsible for over the past 17 years of my gaming experience. However, at the same time, I think it's more than reasonable to also celebrate the return of Casey Hudson. I think he's a great thing for BioWare. Just look at the work. Just look at what he contributed to, and I think that gives you your answer. I think it's a great thing, and it makes me excited for BioWare after this little misstep. So that's it for me. Turning it over to you guys. Do you think Casey Hudson will save Mass Effect? Do you think him joining the company as GM once again means something very good for the franchise, or is it not really related? Do you think they're done with Mass Effect no matter if he joins or not? Let me know what you're thinking in the comment section below. If you stayed till the end and enjoyed the video, click the like button and subscribe for more content. Check out my latest videos by clicking the links on screen. Follow me on Twitter and Facebook so you don't miss another video. Sign up with Juniper to receive exclusive discounts on shirts, hoodies, and more at the JV merch store. Click the link for more details. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll talk to you next time.